bench?
There's a bench somewhere.
Great, yeah, let's do it. Welcome. Let's sit for a while. She's locked out. Oh, there we go. So let's do this. Let's take whatever posture feels the most sort of comfortable and upright at the same time, right? So that's the kind of apparent paradox, right? About sitting is that we're given this instruction to, the most succinct summation of what we're supposed to be doing is total engagement in upright sitting. That's from Dogen's Fukan Zazengi, right? So, and in particular in the uprightness part, right? Where the two sort of mental modes that keep popping up over and over again in the Zen literature are called the upright and the leaning, right? So, and so the word upright is kind of loaded in some ways, right? It has lots and lots of connotations in English and apparently in Chinese, because they used exactly the same word, or not exactly, but very much the same word. It's either crooked or upright. Crooked or leaning, and upright or straight, basically. Are the two different modes. They're Pian and Zheng, right? Turns out Zheng was a word that shows up all over East Asia, and it's all derived from that word, right? Same word. All over East Asian Buddhism, anyway, right? So how to be upright in a way that's unloaded is the question, right? So that it doesn't have this sort of dualistic, graspy quality to it. And I would say it's because when you're sitting upright, it's not because you're saying, I'm going to sit upright now. It's because your body is naturally forming and naturally and continuously, in the light of awareness, forming this posture, right? So some ways to make that happen are to explore the sort of energy and tension in your lower belly and your lower back, right? So to as much as possible, let the natural curves, both of your belly and your back, take place, right? Not forcing either of them to be anything other than they are. And noticing that those muscles need to be engaged, but don't need to be tight, right? Noticing that rather than working to straighten the back, it's more helpful just to imagine that the chest is floating up and that the head is floating up. And that naturally straightens the back and naturally causes this thing to happen where the muscles in your upper back are allowed to relax and soften and even kind of fall towards the base of your spine. The shoulder and arm position, if you place your left palm on your right palm and pin your fingers around in a circle, if you want to do that in mudra, then, but any this applies to any of the hand positions you could take. Your hands on your knees, you can do a slightly tighter, particularly if you're in seiza, this is helpful, a little slightly tighter mudra with your hands that shortens your arms a little bit. But in any case, that mudra becomes comfortable, or any of these hand positions become comfortable largely when you're not so much worrying about the position of your hands. Maybe you allow your hands to rest against either your knees or thighs or your lower abdomen, but fundamentally it's that the joints from your neck through your shoulders and your elbows and your wrists all down are all spacious, and they feel like they're full of maybe air, maybe some full of this sort of soft energy, right? There's nothing, you don't have to do anything with them. Just have just have that sense in your joints that they're soft and flexible and full of energy. If your head floats off your shoulders, your face falls into a kind of vertical plane. Your open eyes are naturally downcast and soft. If you want to make a little effort, maybe make a little effort to have your gaze be wide and expansive. And notice what that does to your mental activity. With respect to the breath, and the breath is this semi-autonomous process that if left works fine if it's left to its own devices, but also is amenable to control, right? So to be aware of your breath is to play with the dynamic relationship between awareness and control. Just to know that that's true. It's okay. Sometimes it can help to find a spot in the body that your breath has an effect on and just monitor the breath from there. In the Vipassana school, often it's the nostrils, right? There's various places in the body that in the yoga schools they talk about being close to or monitoring the breath, the throat, the solar plexus, the hara. In Zen practice, it's mostly the hara. It's as if you watch your breath from the hara. So the sensation when that happens is that the breath on the out breath collapses into the hara, which is to say, into this place that's sort of an inch and a half below your navel and right in the middle of your body. And when you breathe in, the breath flows up out of the hara and fills the body. I know that's not what's really happening, but that's the impression that you get when you watch your breath from the hara. If that doesn't work for you, just just pick someplace else where you feel your breath and watch it from there. Maybe here, the middle of your chest, maybe your throat. Anything is fine. And let the awareness of the breath invite awareness of the whole body and the whole sensorium. Yeah. in last few centuries before the Common Era, a bunch of Buddhists in the Sarvastivadin sect got together and tried to come up with a sort of explanation and analysis of human subjectivity. And they did a pretty good job. And their scheme sort of designates a number of roots of subjectivity, including the five senses, right? And also the kind of, well, generally the high order bullet point is sort of our cognitive faculty, right? Which includes thinking, emoting, etc. And it sort of put those on equal footing. So the idea was, if you're not actually engaged in sort of what we usually think of as thinking, right, then you're taking in and perceiving sensory input, right? And all of this takes place in the light of this kind of mysterious awareness that we have that they don't really do a lot of explaining of, because it's kind of inexplicable, right? So it can be useful when you're sitting to notice when most of what's occupying your mind is your sensory perceptions, right? And it's also good to notice when you're involved in what we normally call thinking, self-narration, maybe planning, etc. And notice how, in some ways, our awareness treats all of those things equally, right? And then how, in some ways, they're different, right? What are the differences? What are the similarities? How do they, and how, most crucially, how do they interact, right? How does sensation become mentation and vice versa? So just do attend to that. Notice when you're thinking. Notice when you're thinking and your attention allows you to notice it. Notice when there's not a lot of that going on, and mainly it's just the succession of sensory perceptions that arise naturally and incite a little bit of memory and explanation, and then retire, right? To make way for the next sensation. In some ways, that's what the standard description or instructions for Zazen calls unthinking, non-thinking. Mm. And remember that the request was to be upright and relaxed. If you discover that something feels uncomfortable, there's a good chance that it's because you momentarily forgot that. So to just attend to the uncomfortableness and where it is, what it's shaped like, what it feels like. Maybe notice the way that just that attention causes things to shift around a little bit, not always necessarily making it better, but just causing a shift. And then once you've really got a feel for it, often that's enough to clarify how you can alleviate the discomfort and just do it in a deliberate, careful way. Oh, that was lovely. So I have to say I'm liking this rectangular cushion. It's not bad. I used to know this guy that worked for IDEO, and he for a while he was a resident at Zen Center, and he brought some fellow IDEO people to a one-day retreat, and they went back to IDEO, and they they decided to redesign the Zafu, and they actually did an amazing thing. They built this thing that was like, it was sort of a lozenge shape, and it had a strap so you could carry it over your shoulder, and it unzipped, and it had these sacks of hulls, like buckwheat hulls in it, that you could add in or take out to change the sort of height and kind of hardness of your seat. And it had a bunch of other really great features. And then the part that was maybe not as good was that you could also tuck your iPhone in a pocket in your Zafu. I thought maybe they shouldn't be doing that, but it was really a good Zafu. Actually, it was nice. I wish I'd managed to get one off them. I went down and gave a bunch of talks there, and they never offered me a Zafu. So I thought we could loosen up maybe a little bit since we've been sitting for a while. So if you're sitting cross-legged, you can flap your knees and roll. If you're sitting in a chair, you can stomp your feet. If you're sitting steady, you can bounce, right? Yeah, exactly. Okay, and then so let's do some twists. So twist just your neck to the left. Look over your left shoulder. Come back to the middle, and then to the right. Look over your right shoulder. And then put your right palm on your left knee. Slip your left arm around behind your back and do a full body twist to the left. Look over your left shoulder. And back to the middle. Same thing to the right. Put your left palm on your right knee. Wrap your right arm around your back and twist to the right, looking over your right shoulder. Keep your back straight and up and your neck straight when you're doing this, upright, to sort of maximize the twist. And then finally, sort of face your left, the angle of your left knee, square up your shoulders, and bend first over your left knee. You can hold yourself up, and you don't have to bend too deeply, but keep your back straight. And then up, and then over your right knee. Okay. So, I guess, first of all, does anybody have any questions about any of that, about the sitting, about sitting in general, about Zen practice in general, or about something specific about how it is when you sit, or any of that, any questions at all? Awesome. Yeah.
That one part in the sit you were talking about, like there's sort of like sensory information and then there's elaboration that happens on top of it. And I kind of noticed that.
Yeah.
And one of the things I've noticed, and I wonder what Zen has to say about this, is it's pretty easy to notice that stuff if I'm like in a room by myself. Not always, but like pretty easy. And it gets much more difficult if I'm like in a conversation with someone. There's all this like theory of mind stuff that comes online, and I think there's like the actual information that's coming from them, and then there's like memories that it's bringing up in me, or like theories about what's going on with the other person, and it just gets like really hard to be clear about that as soon as other people are involved.
No, I totally agree. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's so. I mean, the sort of mode of unloaded receptive attention that that starts to float up when you're sitting staring at a wall, right? Makes it really clear that the sort of natural rhythm of that is sensation arises into perception. That perception lands in our memory, and maybe explanations or elaborations show up, but they're not particularly grippy, and they tend to sort of fade away pretty easily and let go and allow another sensation to arise, which is that's a from a lot of perspectives, that's a tremendously useful way to spend your time, right? And you can imagine how it's functional in lots and lots of different ways. The first thing you notice about thinking is that happens, whether the thought is kicked off by as a follow-on to some perception that's arisen, or just whether it's it's sort of self-suggesting, right? Like I don't know, and everyone can come up with their own example. That mode of self-narration, self-construction, planning, and all the rest of that sort of thing is inherently harder. It's inherently stickier, right? And it gets way stickier when it's fully engaged with the thing that being human is good at, which is talking, planning, narration of various sorts, and all the rest of that sort of thing. So being tangled up with words, and being tangled up with planning, which leans right into grasping and aversion, and then also the complexity of our of human sociality, right? All of those things make it much more difficult to bring along this sort of mode of unloaded receptive attention, right? But it's not impossible, right? And typically what happens is that your attention wanders, or moves between those two modes pretty regularly, right? The even when you're really in the grip of, you know, like I've been doing this project, I just obsess about it for hours, right? And turn it over in my head and all the rest of that sort of thing. And and then insights arise, which is great. I mean, that's what humans are good at, is grinding away at something and then allowing insight to arise, right? It's pretty nice, actually, and they're tremendously useful because it turns out they make it better, right? Yay. But in any case, that stuff is a whole lot grippier. But what you notice is that even in the middle of that, there are these regular invitations that arise to connect and open your awareness to a broader field. They come in really on the order of 5s or 10s of seconds, right? And one of the features of training, this training, is to get more sensitized to those and to take advantage of it, right? And take advantage is a bad phrase, but to take the invitation, right? And the result is, over time, what happens is that your actual experience, particularly if it happens in the moment to be intense, and maybe familiarly intense, triggers this response that goes, "Oh, I recognize this. Open up," right? And at that point, one, the emotional drivers of the whatever thought event you were having, or whatever interaction you were having, they don't go away, but they kind of soften and broaden a little bit, right? And leave room for more possibilities and more options to than your habitual response, which is usually driven by some collection of emotions and a piece of story. And it's like, yes, you must always do this. Right? It turns out that you don't have to, right? And then so that's the practical part. The transcendent part is that it opens you up for experiences that go beyond any of that stuff, right? So anyway, does that help? Or
Yeah, that helps a lot. And
okay.
then I'm also wondering, because at least from what I know, like very little about Zen, which I say in here every week, but like from what I understand, a lot of it is done in like monastic contexts.
Yeah.
And so was there like a specific, like there's like the practices that you do solo, and were there any practices that were more social, or was it just like, oh, you'll get your social stuff because you're surrounded by these other?
No, I mean, there was, I mean, as far as I can tell, the primary driver for Chinese Buddhism in general, and Zen in particular, was that you want to develop a capacity to relate and be with other beings and things skillfully and comfortably, right? In the presence of the human condition, because that's what all the Chinese philosophical systems are about, basically, right? And they have, legalism, Confucianism, Taoism, and a few other fringier ones. They're all about that, right? And Buddhism was the shift in Buddhism was to have it be mostly about that. And the primary axiom of Zen is that all of the useful transmission of the Dharma happens in the context of relationship, right? So yes, there were tons and tons of practices that were designed to bring people together either in a formal way or in an informal way, and have them interact in a way that encouraged skillful interaction and holding this other mind in place while interacting, basically. Yeah, that was the idea. And you know, the reasonable question is, okay, well, what does that look like? Well, the entire koan literature is supposed to be a description of what it looks like, basically, right? That's what it's really, just to answer that question. Like, and you know, the provenance of the koan literature is murky, but by the time it got turned into an actual literature, it's clear that that's what it was about, right? Anyway, something like that. Yeah. Anyone else? Well, so last week, I talked about this koan in the Blue Cliff Record where a monk asked Yunmen, hey, what is the teaching of a lifetime? Which is to say, what are the teachings of the Buddha's lifetime, right? It's a way of saying, sum up the whole meaning of Buddhism for me, please, in one sentence, and or as few sentences as possible. And Yunmen says, an appropriate response, right? Which is pretty good, right? And I talked a little bit about that. I mean, basically, it's exactly what we were talking about, right? Like, you're in the middle of this, ungraspably complex set of interactions. Even when you're sitting in a room all by yourself, staring at a wall, right? You're still in the middle of this ungraspably complex set of interactions with the environment, with your mental image of yourself and other beings. Maybe if there's even one other person in the room, with your present relationship with that person and everything else, right? It's and you're inevitably required to frame a response moment after moment after moment, right? And you could argue that the whole function of Buddhist practice and Zen practice in particular is to make a response that leaves both the self and the world more full of possibilities, and lives comfortably and skillfully with whatever version of the human condition you have. Basically, that's it. That's the appropriate response, and that's the teachings of a lifetime, is what exactly that means, and maybe how to practice it, right? And when I was before I came over here, I was driving my daughter to robotics, and just because she's in an all girls robotics group in high school, and she was trying to convince me that I should give a talk based on the songwriting of Taylor Swift. She played me a whole bunch of Taylor Swift songs in the car, hopefully hoping that I would something would jump out at me and I would pick something. But sadly, really all I was hearing was grasping an aversion, basically. I thought, well, okay, maybe I won't do that. So tragically, the either good news or bad news, depending on how you look at it, is that the koan after that one. The one I just mentioned was case 14 in the Blue Cliff record. Case 15 is about the same pair of guys, and in fact, it's part of the same exchange, right? So the student says, "Okay, so what's sum up Buddhism for me?" And Yunmen says, "An appropriate response." And then he says, "Okay, so what if it's neither your present cognitive faculty or your present or present phenomena, obviously your sensation of present phenomena. What is it then?" And Yunmen says, "An upside down response," or maybe an upside down statement, right? The two uh, um, sentences are virtually identical, right? But there's one character different. One is appropriate, and the other one could be translated as upside down, right? Which is kind of like April Fool's a little bit, right? And so, I mean, presumably we were all sitting here watching all that stuff, right? The present cognition. Does everybody know who George Lakoff is? Yeah, he's a professor at Berkeley. He's at he's kind of in the embodied mind school of philosophy or something like that, of philosophy of mind. And somebody once invited him to give a talk under the auspices of Zen Center, only not at Zen Center, at the De Young Museum in one of their conference spaces. And at one point, he was standing up there, and he basically said, I have one thing to say to all you Zen students in the audience: you're always thinking. Which is pretty great, and it's in fact it's true, right? Like where your cognitive faculty, just like your proprioceptive sense, your the sense of the surface of your skin, your taste buds, et cetera, they're always working, right? And bringing something to the experience of the present moment, right? And the same is true for our cognitive faculty. It's always doing something, right? It's the only time maybe it's not doing something is when you're in a deep dreamless sleep, or maybe coma or something like that, right? And who knows, maybe not, right? My dad was once in a coma, really serious coma, and says he remembered all sorts of things out of it. So you never know, right? But in any case, you're always thinking, right? And you're always also not thinking, right? You're always in that the faculty that we were talking about earlier, that just brings in the world in a kind of unloaded a way that is not involved with self-construction, self-narration, our planning faculty, our ability to categorize things. It's not like it doesn't have any structure. It's just that it's not that, right? That thing is always running too, right? And mostly people are aware of their cognitive faculty because we spend so much, because it's so energy assuming, consuming, time consuming, and attention consuming, right? But one of the functions of Zen practice and other meditative practices, I think, is to is to balance that out a little bit and make it so that that other faculty is more present and can offer a counterweight to the impulses and dictates of our engine of self-narration, right? But he's saying this: what if it's not cognition and not sensing, right? Not the world, right? What is it? And there's two possible ways of interpreting the answer. One is, that's a ridiculous question, right? That's a possibility. The other one is, it can't possibly be described in words or by using sensory metaphors, right? Because it's beyond all that, right? And in some ways, that's true. I mean, the thing that the most, if you just study this thing directly in your experience, right? The thing that's the most obvious is that regardless of whether you're feeling a twinge in your knee or I don't know, noticing a bug crawling across the floor, or just bringing in sensation and letting it land, or maybe thinking about the twinge in your knee, or thinking about what you're going to do after this, or what you want for breakfast in the morning, or the rest of that sort of thing. And the thing that's amazing about it is that and the people I was talking about earlier, the Sarvastivadins, they were very careful to separate out attention or awareness from all the rest of that stuff, right? Because it really does seem like it's a separate thing, right? But what is it? Nobody has even scratched the surface of describing it, as far as I can tell, right? Of coming close to what is it. I mean, there are people that are furiously out there writing books like, what's his name, Metzinger, right, and all these other people. But the nice thing about the Metzinger, at least the Ego Tunnel book, is he says, let's be clear, nobody knows how this stuff works. I'm just trying to ask the questions about and frame the questions about the questions that we'd ask in order to start figuring out what it is, right? That's as murky as it is, right? And fundamentally, it's kind of ungraspable, right? It's clearly something that arises out of how we're built, right? Because we are, right? And Descartes' wish to move it into another realm and connect us with it. What did he want to connect us with it by? Like something like the thalamus or something like that. Pineal gland. Thank you. That's right. Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That people don't normally believe that these days, right? So it really arises out of how we're built, but it's fundamentally ungraspable, right? So that's the other way of interpreting it, right? And it has this quality of both autonomy and a shred of agency, right? Which is true for pretty much all of the other processes that we're talking about, right? Like the breath, the posture, all the rest of that sort of thing. And my sense of the actual function of Zen practice is that it picks a faculty like that, like say our breath, right? And it says, here's what you need to do. You need to become aware of your breath and not struggle with controlling it. Right? And if you can train yourself to do that, that'll be helpful, right? And the same thing is true with your posture. If you can be continuously aware of your posture without struggle, right? Then that there's a certain kind of unconditioned appreciation of the body, of the breath, of all these other faculties that arises seemingly out of nowhere, right? When that happens, my sense is that all of those training efforts with respect to processes that we have that are both autonomous and subject to control and agency are really about training our relationship with our awareness, basically. And it's just that you can't, it's like maximally hard to start with your awareness. So you might as well start with your breath, right? And sneak up on the other thing. Right? Anyway, so that's kind of all I had to say about it. Does anybody have any questions about that, or what do you think? Yeah, go ahead. Yeah. So, well, the whole exchange goes like this. So, a monk asks Yunmen, "What's the teaching of a whole lifetime?" And Yunmen says, "An appropriate response, or an appropriate statement, either one." And it's translated both ways. And then this guy says, "Okay, what if it's not present intellect or present cognition, and it's not present phenomena or sensation, right, or perception? And what is it?" And Yunmen says, "An upside down statement." That's the koan. And I was going to dig out my phone and pull out the Blue Cliff record, and there's some kind of nice comments on it. The inline comments by Shwedo are like, they're pretty negative, actually. It's like, they basically says he blew it, right? But anyway, that's a koan. Yeah, of course.
I'm interested to know how else that character gets used. Upside down. Where else?
Well, it's interesting that you say that. I mean, I try and look this stuff up, and I didn't this time, but I once gave a talk on this koan to Hartford Street Zen Center, and there was this woman there who, she was from Laos, I think, and she said that the word for upside down gets used a lot, and in particular, it's an epithet that's applied to people. Like, people are the upside down animals, basically, right? Which I thought was kind of interesting. But yeah, I'd be interested to look it up too, actually.
What are they getting at?
Yeah.
He's implying something.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Well, I'll do it when I get home. I think I have I've managed to find the original Chinese for most of the texts I work with. I'm not sure if I have an obvious one for the Blue Cliff record, but I might actually. So anyway, yeah. Well, we have a few more minutes. Let's sit some more. Thank you so much.